Hey, what's up everyone? And today I've got another one of these news videos that I'm going to do. We're going to talk about the news and I'm going to explain to you guys why there are some very interesting developments here in the United States. So, if you recall, I did a stream not too long ago where I was basically saying the evictions crisis was going to be a nothing burger and that there's very likely nothing consequential that's going to come of it. Well, I've been reading some stuff lately that has been making me kind of walk back on that. Some things have come to mind and I've been aware of some very uncomfortable truths, so to speak. But before we get to that, I want to do a little commentary on my most previous video. Very brief, say 3 to 4 minute commentary. So I was reading comments from my last video, as you guys know, how Vosh manipulates you. I just put that together and I was reading some comments from some detractors. I can tell some Vosh fans saw it. I mean, the video basically went semi-viral. It's got 2,500 views in like not even 24 hours, which is pretty surprising. Honestly, kind of impressive. I didn't think it was gonna. I legit did not think that it was going to grow that fast. Like it was going to get that kind of attention. But you know, unfortunately, it's the Vosh attention or the Vosh videos that tragically get the most attention because people are obsessed with this guy. So that's one of the main reasons why I do videos like that. Well, I'm just here to say that I am kind of annoyed, not really irritated, but a little annoyed at some of the responses that I saw from some of my detractors. And honestly, I'm not really impressed by what his detractors had to say about it. All right. Literally everything that they had to say in response to that is literally it's Joker cope out of context. That's all these people have to say. Joker cope out of context. You're the guy who did the Joker laugh. Yeah, I laughed during a debate because he didn't know what he was fucking talking about. And beyond that, they're like, oh, you're coping, cope. I feel like people who say these words don't even realize what it means. Coping is not when you make a video exposing someone's incredulous nonsense and bad faith argumentative style. Coping is when you're trying to compensate for being aggravated or pissed off about something or being in the wrong on an issue. And, I can't be coping if I am right on the topics at hand. So make of that as you will. And then, I've had several people say that I'm clipping him out of context, where his videos, the clips were out of context. What I showed was out of context, which is just totally fucking bullshit. Absolute fucking bullshit. I don't know how I can't spell it any more clear as day as when. Oh, let me ask you guys something. What did I bring up in that video? Huh? It was his own words, all right? Things that Vosh himself has done and said over the course of his discussions/debates. So when I brought up the Jackson Hinkle debate, where he is repeatedly trying to poison the well by insinuating that Jackson Hinkle is like a conspiracy theorist and is like a Holocaust denier, it doesn't get any more plain or obvious than that. I don't really know how I can spell it out any more obviously for you people. Or when I point out how he tries to get people to doubt their own sanity and thoughts, it's crazy to me that they're going to really, or they'll even criticize like how I used parasocial relations as an example of manipulation. Well, in a sense, it kind of is because, I mean, yeah, they develop organically and you're going to have people develop followings surrounding personalities organically. But what I'm saying is that he actively cultivates it and he actively fosters that sort of environment. So like all these Vosh fans, all these people that are downvoting the video trying to ratio it, the people that are sitting here trying to say like out of context Joker cope, these people, they don't really sound any different from Jordan Peterson fans to me, because Jordan Peterson fans say a lot of the exact same shit whenever their favorite demagogue comes under fire for his bullshit you know so I just think it's very funny that it's like that. Like these people like to act like they're so much better than Trump supporters, like they're so much better than the Petersonites and so on, when they're guilty of a lot of the exact same fallacious reasoning that a lot of these Petersonites and Trumpites are. So, and it makes perfect sense because the far right and the right wing is pretty much Vosh's recruiting ground. So a bunch of ex-conservative YouTubers, a bunch of ex-conservatives come over to his side and get bread pilled, so to speak, but they still have the same psychology of a reactionary. So like they'll come over to his side of the argument, they'll come over to his side of the aisle, but they won't arrive there through rational thought or critical thinking. A lot of the times they'll just arrive there through, Vosh using his emotionally manipulative debate tactics, That's how they'll come over to his side, or they haven't developed the critical thinking skills either. It's just crazy to me. Like, I'll be the first to admit that I'm wrong about something, and plenty of people that I know are like that. But when this guy literally, like, how can this person be right about literally everything? How is it that he can just make an outrageous claim and then called to scrutiny over it, backpedals, says that he never did in the first place, and then try to inject additional nuance, and he'll like rinse and repeat and do this over and over again. And I don't understand how people don't pick up on this shit. It's ridiculous to me. But anyways, which is gaslighting. I don't know who or what you're referring to, but anyways, that's all I had to say about that. I was just voicing a little annoyance because I figured my detractors would have something more substantial to say than cope, Joker laugh, and out of context, because that's literally the only arguments I've gotten from these people so far. But anyways, let's go ahead and get to the topic at hand. Let's talk about the topic at hand. All right. So let's talk a little bit about America, this wonderful, wonderful, gigantic, massive highway, this massive settler colonial project of biblical scales. Let's talk about this wonderful country, all right? This gigantic, one giant highway and landfill from sea to shining sea. This giant fucking suburb. So, this country, for all intents and purposes, is a time bomb. And I think people underestimate exactly how unstable the imperial core is right now for a litany of reasons. We just recently had a major economic meltdown, the COVID-19 crash, and we are still in the middle of a crisis. Right now, there's talk of a general strike going on the 15th of October. I don't know what I could put together, but I'm going to see if my comrades here with the Cincinnati Socialists could put together or organize something, because if a general strike's about to transpire, I want to do what I can to get that up and running by October 15th. So that's just what I've heard through the grapevine. So what are the evidences that America is basically a rotting, collapsing empire? Well, the best way to describe the collapse of the United States is the slowest train wreck in history. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's just it's a train wreck. It's a train wreck, but going really slow, like, But I'm not going to lie. I kind of wish Trump was still president, just because watching Donald Trump run this country was a lot like watching the fall of the Roman Empire on fast forward. Trump really was the accelerationist candidate. But anyways, so the Aspen Institute calculated that in 2020, an estimated 30 million people, up to 40 million people, were at risk for evictions. That's how many people were up behind on their rent last year, upwards to 30 to 40 million people. And what they did, Congress just kept extending those moratoriums over and over and over again, just like, prolonging when people had to pay their rents and their dues, but people remained unemployed for months. So you have all these people that were just unemployed for months, unable to pay their rent, and you had people take the longest amount of time to go back to work. Everyone was just subsisting on unemployment because for the first time in a long time, Americans realized that it's a fucking better alternative to stay at home and make the same money that you would make getting treated like shit behind a gas register at McDonald's. So no wonder why people wanted to stay at home. It makes perfect sense. So people were living off the unemployment. People took their sweet time in a lot of these states to get their jobs back. And a lot of these states basically started trying to end or shorten the amount of time people could be on unemployment because they're trying to get people back to work. They're trying to get the economy going. So a lot of people are off the unemployment, but we're still floating at a real U6 unemployment rate of roughly 10 to 12%, which is pretty bad. That's really bad, guys. When you have all these people that can't pay their debts, that are locked in the cycle of poverty. So, but the thing is that this rentier crisis, this evictions crisis, actually dates back to 2018. It was actually as early as 2018 that we were starting to accumulate and grow the number of people that were consistently behind on rents, and how much strain on the system was being put on because of it, because wages are stagnating, but the price of non-inelastic goods just keeps getting speculated on and keeps climbing up and up and up and up and up. So eventually people are going to be left out to dry, because if people's aren't receiving commensurate rises in wages, they're not going to be able to pay the bills, and they're going to have to take on debt in order to participate in average everyday society and not end up on the fucking streets. So this crisis actually dates back to as late as 2018. The writing was on the wall then, and we were going to, COVID or not, we were going to face a recession. So COVID just made it worse because of the lockdown. But one way or another, we were going to have a sharp plummet in the stock market like we did last year. So right now, we basically have the government buying bonds and pumping trillions of liquidity into the market. And now, everything's overvalued in the stock market. Like all the stocks, like the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, it's all overvalued. They aren't fucking worth what it says that it's worth, because it's just the government that's just hyperinflated them by buying all these bonds. But eventually what's going to happen is, because of how expensive all these indexes are, because they aren't fucking worth what the government has propped them up to be worth, they're going to crash again. There is going to be another crash. So you've got that going on. Rent moratoriums expired over a week ago. So you have all these people that have no protections. And in a lot of these states, they're continuing, the crisis is underway. In a lot of the states right now, the crisis is underway, and people within all these different states are basically at risk of being evicted, and are currently in the process of being evicted right now. It's going to be a protracted problem that's going to take place over the course of months, but we are going to see millions in homeless people by the end of this year. There are going to be millions of homeless people by the end of this year, because the protections for people behind on their rents, it's not enough. I mean, Democrats were only able to secure protections for 80% of counties, which still leaves millions of people out to dry. And just to let you guys know, let's get a little bit intersectional in our analysis here. The majority of people that are at risk of being evicted right now are African Americans. People within Black communities are overwhelmingly at risk for evictions right now and ending up on the streets during a pandemic with a deadly, highly contagious, mutating virus, the Delta strain of COVID, which we will get to momentarily. Let's do this. Where were we? All right. The crisis is underway. The Democrats did secure protections for the majority of most of the population. They were able to, but they weren't able to secure complete protections. So in a lot of districts, you have the moratoriums that are lifted. So people within a lot of these cities and districts are not going to have the protection. So yeah, we are still going to have an evictions crisis. Only reason I was saying it was a nothing burger was because I didn't think the Democrats were going to be bribed into stop fighting. Yeah, that's right. The Democrats were bribed into not fighting anymore. And I've got an interesting article that I want to share with you guys about this. Excuse me. So check this out. You ready for this shit? The Rue awared me of this. The Dems scored real estate cash before letting evictions ban expire. The Democrats received $1 million from a real estate mogul just before failing in their relentless campaign to extend a lifeline to struggling renters. House Democrat Super PAC took $1 million from the chairman of a massive apartment rental company in June before letting the federal eviction moratorium expire over last weekend amid a COVID-19 pandemic that continues to surge. Last week, President Joe Biden's administration belatedly called on Democrats in Congress to pass legislation to extend the CDC eviction ban only days before it was set to expire on July 31st, a full month after the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote that the moratorium would have to be extended by legislation. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said last Friday that Democratic leaders had only learned one day earlier that the Biden administration was counting on lawmakers to renew the evictions ban via legislation. However, she claimed the next day that her colleagues had led a relentless campaign to extend the moratorium, blaming Republicans for its failure. On Monday, Pelosi sent a letter to the Democratic lawmakers arguing that the moratorium must be extended by the administration. Soon after this, the Biden administration indicated in a statement it would keep trying to tackle the issue, noting that it's directly federal agents to re-examine whether there's any other authorities to take additional actions to stop evictions. In the meantime, the president will continue to do everything in his power to help renters from eviction. Democrats' failure to extend the CDC eviction moratorium, which was first put in place by the Trump administration in September 2020, comes as a deadly Delta COVID variant spreads around the nation, leading the CDC to urge people who are vaccinated to start wearing masks indoors again in public settings in places with high infection rates. Allowing evictions to proceed would make the pandemic worse and would likely cause massive hardship on an unprecedented scale. Last year, researchers found that the expiration of state eviction bans had caused more than 400,000 new COVID cases between March and September. At least 3.6 million people are now facing risk of eviction. Minimum, 3.5 million people minimum are facing eviction right now. That number could be higher. According to the Aspen Institute, more than 15 million people are living in households that are behind on rent. Guys, this is just a disaster waiting to happen. Like, you thought the BLM protests were bad? You thought the BLM protests were bad? Remember the protests that swept the whole country last year? Wait until this happens. Seriously, wait until old people, women, and children are being forcibly dragged from their homes and have nowhere else to go by the cops. Wait until there's active rioting and fighting in the streets because of this. Like this is just a fucking unbelievable disaster. This is not good. This is not good at all. George Marcus, chairman of both the massive real estate brokerage Marcus and Millichap and the real estate investment trust Essex Property Trust, donated $1 million on June 1st to House Majority PAC, a super PAC that works to Democratic. They literally bribed the Democrats fucking $1 million to stop fighting. They also donated $263,000 in June to a joint fundraising committee benefiting House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's campaign. How old is this vampire? How old are you? This woman has to be at least 900 years old. Exactly, 900 years old. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Marcus, who had a net worth of 1.7 billion. Okay, who is this guy? Let's do this. Chairman, let's do this. Let's search this guy up. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is the Greek-American billionaire real estate broker. Why don't we... You know what we ought to do is we ought to find the information on this guy and just saying we need to find his email or his mailbox and, send him some friendly letters. Because this guy is directly responsible for the immiseration and destruction of millions of innocent lives. So when people are out there in the streets, fucking out there on the streets, desperate, being dragged out of their homes during a deadly pandemic in the winter, this is the man you have to blame right here. Why? So that he could continue to make fucking money. $1.7 billion isn't enough for this guy, apparently. He's going to have even more fucking money. So, yeah, if it means coming at the cost, every person that dies from COVID or from poverty-related causes in the next year because of this shit, that blood is going to be on this asshole's hands. I'm just saying. The blood is on his hands. And these are the people that we should be fucking pissed at. You know, when not just the politicians, but the people bribing them as well. The only real benefit I see from this transpiring is the potential for radicalization that's coming. There's a lot of people ages 5 to 20 who are going to grow up during this, who are going to live during this crisis. You know, I remember how tough the subprime mortgage crisis was. The only reason our family was even able to make it through it was a combination of the food bank and parents living on welfare because they were both unemployed for like almost 2 years. My dad lost his job. My mother lost her job. So yeah, like we barely made it through that. You know, I can only imagine what families are going to be going through when they go through this. Holy fucking shit. Blame the game, not the player. No, we can definitely blame the player in this case because he straight up fucking bribed the Democrats to cease fighting for moratoriums. So yeah, I can blame the player and the game because the players are the ones perpetuating the game. So yeah. And there were some eviction protesters at Washington, D.C. pretty recently. And they've been driven off Capitol Hill. They've been driven away from the Capitol. They are no longer allowed to protest in front of the Capitol Hill building, the White House. They're not allowed to protest in the front of the White House anymore because the cops have driven them off. So like you have these protesters that aren't allowed to protest. You have the active criminalizing of protesting. Anybody remember that bill that Biden signed off of, the new counterinsurgency, counterterrorism legislation that he used, and the provocation for which was the Capitol Hill riot at the start of the year, and how I rightly predicted a few months ago that this very legislation was going to be used to disproportionately target and criminalize left-wing protesters. Damn, it feels good to be right. I knew this was coming, like seriously. I knew that this legislation and the Biden administration, the good old horseshoe theory centrism, was going to be weaponized and utilized in order to criminalize protesting. They've been doing it a very long time. I remember reading an article a while ago that over the Dakota Access Pipeline, how the oil companies were successful in criminalizing the protesting of the Dakota Access Pipeline because it was obstructing their profit margins. So yeah, that's what's going on right now. Like, this is some late Roman Empire shit, guys. This is straight up some late Roman Empire shit. All I'm going to say is what I said the other day. If you're not in a tenants union, join one, participate in one. If you're not in a socialist org, join one, because people are going to need our help more than ever before. And this is a very good opportunity for us to expose the cracks within the system. There are only two directions that people are going to go. Since the liberal status quo is failing, there's two directions we can go: socialism or barbarism. So it's our job to guide people in the right direction. But now, let's talk about this new Delta COVID strain. All right. COVID cases are on the rise again. So I'm going to go ahead and look up the COVID-19 cases per day chart. I believe there's a U.S. chart. Here we go. COVID tracking. Let's see here. February, March. Does this only go up to March? Shit. U.S. metrics. I'm looking for the... Here, I'm going to go ahead and full screen again. Let's do this. All right. I'm looking for the chart that showcases cases per day, because right now we're on the Delta strain is on the rise. So daily cases currently hospitalized. April, October. I'm going to go back real quick. Where's the chart? Oh, here it is. This is the famous chart. Look at that, guys. Apparently, we are only 45% at the peak. But our new 7-day average as of the first week of August is 110,000 cases per day on average. So this is what we got for cases. It's on the rise. And it's gonna peak. It's gonna peak where it was as of the end of last year. We're just gonna see cyclical waves of new mutant strains of COVID that are just gonna wipe out waves of people year by year. So what are they gonna do? Are they just not gonna lock down? And if they don't lock down because it would fuck the economy too bad, I mean, what are we just going to see? Wave after wave of COVID cases just obliterating people. And of course, once again, it's African American, indigenous, and Latino communities that are going to be disproportionately affected by this. It's a little systematic white supremacy mixed in with that systematic classism, because it's poor and broke communities that are disproportionately going to face the brunt of this. So yeah, these are likely from Delta strain, and CDC is just being worthless with the advice it's giving people. I mean, yeah, from what I hear, they're starting to advise people wear masks again, but we need to bring back shelter in place. We need to universal masks. I heard that double masking is what's recommended now because supposedly Delta strain is extremely contagious. If you're going to go into any grocery stores or go around and about, make sure you sanitize your hands. Like as soon as you come out of the grocery store, social distancing. Like, guys, take this shit seriously, because the government is not going to save you for a litany of reasons. The U.S. government is fundamentally incapable of dealing with this pandemic. So, if they don't shut down the economy again, which like Biden straight up said there will be no shutdown. Like he's straight up said at the beginning of the year, they're not going to shut down the economy again. On top of that, you've got all those evictions. You've got Delta strain. Like, oh no, it's a recipe for disaster. I would not be surprised if this trend line shot like above and beyond what we got right here, and we saw new record numbers of cases over the course of this winter. Jesus Christ. And what's so funny? Actually, I'll get to that in the end, because there's another thing I want to talk about. Speaking of moratoriums and so on, there's also a looming housing crisis that's coming as well. While everyone's getting acclimated to the new normal, there's another housing crisis coming. I've got an interesting article about it that I want to go through. But basically, economic expert Fred Harrison, the man who predicted the dot-com bubble as well as the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008, is now predicting that we are going to see a massive crash in 2006. Yeah, we're going to see another huge economic crash pretty soon here. And he says it's primarily going to be driven by the housing crisis, because the housing crisis has been hyperinflated into a new bubble, So we got debt out the wazoo. They can't pay people enough for their cars and their houses and their education and for their healthcare and for their housing and so on. All these things that are necessary, like to participate in regular American life. We have like debts out the wazoo. And forgive me for going on this tangent, but this is the reason why I say GDP means, I'm not going to say it's a bad economic indicator, but I will say it's not a very good one, because America's GDP is driven up by rampant speculation and by debts. So yeah, Americans may have a high GDP per capita. We have the highest GDP per capita in the world, but we also pay more than the rest of the world for inferior services that give us worse outcomes on average, So dude, if we had a national healthcare plan and we had some sort of universal housing plan, people don't even realize how much, the answers to all these problems are really simple. Last year, we only needed a fraction of the workforce to be actually out there working, all the essential workers. We had 40% of the population non-essential workers that were sheltered in place. And we were still able to keep the entire economy running. We were still able to run civilization with a fraction of the people working that we did during that time. That should give you a small idea as to how much people are working pointless bullshit jobs just to make the capitalists more money. We legit do not need to be working the hours that we do. These are things that should be agitated for right now. Universal housing, national health care plan, of course, $20 an hour minimum wage, $15 an hour. It's now not cutting it anymore with the rampant inflation that's going on. the rising rate of inflation, we now need a $20 minimum wage, because if you scale wages with productivity as well as inflation, it comes out to 20 to 25 an hour, depending on the state anyways. So this is what we need. There's plenty of other things you can agitate about as well. Oh, how about the CARES Act? You guys know about the CARES Act, right? How fucking $6 trillion were given to Wall Street and the general public got a paltry $1,200 check. Paltry $1,200 check that amounted to not even $250 billion for relief in the public. And mind you, the vast majority of that money went straight to paying people's rent. People spent that money on rent. And then the renters sent that money to the banks. So, in the end, the banks got all the money. The banks just straight up got bailed out. And that's all that they can do at this point, is just keep inflating the economy. Inflate it over and over and over again as it continues to crash again and again and again. And it's funny how the people that criticize the Federal Reserve, these reactionaries, the Fed, for manipulating the economy, these libertarians, these crypto fascists, like, if we didn't have a Federal Reserve, our economy would have literally fallen apart years ago. Like, that's what they don't even realize. But enough rambling. On to this article. Let's go ahead and share screen again. All right. In Michigan, it's 9, and most businesses who advertise minimum wage cheat on the wage and pay below it. Oh, yeah, it has to be $20 minimum. The true black pill is the game outlasts the players. Planets become uninhabitable, but robots keep up commodity chains. Yeah, S4A talked about the Delta strain as well. If you guys, that's another good socialist channel. Check out S4A. He makes good content as well. But yeah, no, in all honesty, that's very true. But there's a limit to how much you can harvest and take from the planet. Even with increased production efficiency and so on, you can't grow an economy by not using something. So fundamentally, the problem is we are using up our finite resources via an infinite growth consumption economy. And this is why I personally am an advocate of a steady state economy. I'm not really in favor of degrowth. If it could be done in a way to where everyone's needs could be met and we don't have to impede too much on people's living standards, then I think that would be nice. But I think a better way to look at this is just steady state economy. You take from the earth, but you also return what you've given to it, because if you look in nature, nothing is wasted. Everything gets recycled. We have a biocycle, a water cycle, we have an energy cycle. We need to learn to integrate our economy with that cycle, because it's only by doing that will we be able to reproduce civilization, So anyways, Biden is a dishonest version of Trump. At least Trump didn't pretend to be an asshole. Yeah. Trump was an asshole, but yeah, U.S. potential is squandered in capitalism. Imagine if it became socialist but with natural resources, industrialized nation with big. Yeah, no, people don't realize how good we've got it. We won the geographical lottery. We've got resources out the wazoo. We've got a large population of hardworking individuals. People don't realize if we could just excise this tumor, all right? If we could just excise this tumor of a ruling class and establish a worker state that actually gives a shit about people's well-being and actually runs according to a rational plan, I am convinced average life expectancy in this country would jump into the 90s within the first decade and a half to 2 decades. We could have infrastructure bills that would blow Western Europe out of the water. The social democrats, the Kalinskyites. This man, the guy who constantly jacks off Norway and acts like that's a model to uphold. We could set up a system that blows the Norwegian model out of the water. Seriously, if the Soviets were able to go from peasantry and Rasputin and fucking horseback carriages to second largest economy on earth and industrial superpower, imagine what biggest economy on earth with all the resources that we have at our disposal would be able to achieve. People don't even realize like how much better things can be. And like when you actually consider how good socialism is, social democracy really is just a bribe and a half measure. And the problem with people like this is how much they are wedded to the current system, and why I really don't think Kyle Kalinske is an ally in the grand scheme of things. I wish I could talk to one of these soc dems, man. I just wish I could explain like how much better things could be if we ran an economy according to a rational plan, you know? Seriously. So, another issue right here, housing market will crash in 2026. Housing, yet another issue that could be solved if we just got away from the turbulence of the market, the anarchy of the market. If only we didn't leave it to a bunch of reptilians. If only it wasn't left up to these motherfuckers to run the stock market, you know? If we didn't leave it up to these assholes, we'd be good. The UK housing market will continue to thrive all the way through 2026, at which point it will crash. That's the warning from the man who correctly predicted the housing market crash of 1990 and 2008. Fred Harrison is a British author and economics commentator and has developed an 18-year property cycle theory that has time and time again been shown to correctly predict the ups and downs of the housing market. Speaking to this is money, he said. When Tony Blair and Gordon Brown entered Downing Street in 1997, I wrote to them others, including Alastair Campbell, to explain they had 10 years in which to prevent housing prices peaking in 2007. I explained that housing prices in the UK would peak in the final quarters of 2007 and that this would be followed by a global depression. The 2008 financial crisis could have been avoided, except that Blair's government failed to heed my warning. What counts is the innate characteristics of the land market, plus our desire for capital gains. The driving force is the unique characteristic of land. They ain't making any more of it, and the supply is fixed in locations where people want to live or work. On top of that, natural phenomenon is speculative habit of exploiting this market for additional gains. It's effective to help elevate prices above what they otherwise would be and will drive the cycle towards the collapse. He says here that the 2026 crash will eclipse that of 2008. Yeah, stack this housing crash with cyclical waves of COVID that just wipe out scores of people, as well as the perpetual economic crisis. Because, guys, we're still in the crisis of austerity. We are still in the same neoliberal crisis that we've been in since 1970. The contradictions of capitalism do not go away. They just mount on one another as the ruling class and the government creates these patches, temporary patches, to keep the system going. That's all it is. So the interviewer asks, is there any way to avoid the 2026 crash happening? Sadly not, apparently. Nothing can stop the crash of 2026 other than if prices were limited to long-run affordable levels. But governments refuse to contemplate that prospect. If people are happy with booms and busts, there doesn't need to be a solution. The best I can do is explain the future so that people can make informed judgments. Okay. So, he says that there is no solution outside of tweak patch here, tweak patch there. It is true that if we had more heavily regulated the governments, that we could make these changes. The problem is that our state has been totally fucking seized by agents of the ruling class. And the only way to seize any prospective locations within the state is to be an agent of the ruling class. So it's a weird catch-22. And this is why lately I've been railing so hard against Kalinskeites and social democrats, because in their hubris, in their naivete, in their shielding of the Democrats and making all these excuses for them, what they don't take into account is that in order to get to these positions of power and authority, you must serve capital. You must say one thing and do the other. One cannot serve two masters. You can't occupy a popular position of government and genuinely serve the people or be a leader for and by the people, all right? At least not within the context of the Republican and Democratic Party. So I'm going to post some good advice. So there's some good advice right there. I've got myself a piece of my own. But what I'm saying is that the answer to this really is simple. The answer is simpler than you think, guys. It really is. Like, if we had the next time one of these crashes come and all these housing assets, all these financial instruments just plummet in price, as they all plummet in price and you have the dip come, instead of the state coming in and just propping it back up with free funny money, instead of propping it up with green confetti like they've been doing, instead, what you do is you have the government come in and liquidate. They come in and they buy all these financial instruments and assets. So rather than bailing out the banks, bailing out the corporations, bailing out all this industry, you instead nationalize it. You convert it all into public property. And an intelligent government that is run by very competent capitalists, or a very competent government could do this, and we could massively circumvent crisis this way, and at the same time create a synthetic boom, because we're deviating away from the profit motive and towards a more rational economic plan. You wouldn't need to have waves of people out on the streets and unemployments. You wouldn't need to not have proper lockdowns. You wouldn't need to have the irrationality of the stock market that's driven by people just trying to speculate on life-supporting goods. You could straight up like rein all this shit in, and you could massively solve the problems. People act like there's no rational solution to these problems. Quite the contrary, there is. It's just nobody wants to do it because that's socialism, because that makes too much fucking sense, even if it's for the greater good of maintaining the capitalist system. And my solution would maintain capitalism. It would actually, unironically, dude, we do need an FDR on steroids, is what I would say if I were a social democrat. But a strong state capitalism could save the system. But in the ruling class's hubris, in their reptile minds, in their arrogance, and their desire for more and more at the expense of others, the nonstop drive for wealth and power and consolidation of wealth and power and so on, due to that nonstop, never-ending drive, they're power slaves. So they'll never see it. And whenever someone, like even, like the likes of Alan Greenspan, like the feds, like Jason Unruh came in and talked about this the other day. Jason said that even when, the Fed, like the people that are in charge of the Federal Reserve, try to suggest just minor reforms so that the economy just doesn't totally crash, the reactionaries will see that as like a heretic interfering with their sacred cow, the market. And you just got to leave it all up to market anarchy and correction. It's a fucking religion with these people. They fundamentally, they're just too ideologically driven, too greedy, and too arrogant to see the fall before them. And I can only hope that by the time that people wake up and smell the coffee and realize it, that they won't just settle for concessions, because it's only the threat of revolution that brings concessions, all right? That's how we get social democratic reforms. But it's in this way that they are nothing more than a temporary bribe used by the ruling class to buy time and keep the will of the people off their backs, keep the masses of proletarian off of their backs. They're just bribes, temporary privileges that at the moment and in the future they will chip away at because of a phenomenon known as the falling rate of profit. Bankers in crisis be like, don't worry, governments will distribute that emergency money for you. Yeah, but all they do is pocket it. So, socialism with Chinese characteristics, unironically, state capitalism would save America. Like, it would straight up save the system. And I think that a communist party should have, like a popular communist party should have a platform resembling a sort of state capitalism. I do think an NEP is necessary. You briefly introduce the NEP, and then here's what you do. When the bourgeoisie goes on strike, and when they do a capital strike and the economy crashes, here's what you do. You just have the government come in and liquidate it, and you just seize their assets. Be like, here, we'll purchase your capital at a fixed cost, and we're going to turn it into public property, and just seize all this capital, seize all these financial assets, and you just massively expand government jobs, and you just employ a bunch of people and attain full employment through the government. Do what China's doing. China actually has a pretty efficient and well-structured economic model, all right? And I know what I'm suggesting isn't socialism. I understand that, This is like a patch, all right? But you could use the rationale of this, as well as like the reintroduction of unions, as well as new workers' committees and labor committees, and the instruments of workers' control. By introducing instruments of workers' control, you could effectively pave the way for greater reforms, which can eventually give way to socialism. Like, that's the ultimate reason why the ruling class doesn't want to do this, even though it makes too much fucking sense. It's because they understand that if they introduce the reforms that I'm talking about, even if it would make them more money and save them in the long run, even if it would save them in the long run and save their system in the long run, they don't want to do it. Why? Because it would give workers a bigger seat at the table. Workers would have a bargaining chip. Not only would workers have a bargaining chip, but also, they don't like the government interfering in their sacred cow, the other reason I stated earlier, and because it's at the cost of their short-term profits. These are ultimately the reasons why that they don't want to do the state capitalist route, and they would rather continue with neoliberalism until the planet's wrecked beyond repair and they're forced to stake it out in their private military bunkers, armed and protected by hundreds of guards, shielding themselves and sheltering themselves from the inevitable angry mobs that are going to emerge. Like, we haven't even reached the anger phase yet, guys. Just saying. Social democratic state capitalism would only delay the problems of capital. Well, yeah, the goal wouldn't be to end there. The goal would be to transition to a full-fledged socialist planned economy, you know? And within that transition, you could abolish money, and you can remunerate people in the form of labor vouchers. First, you have your state capitalism. You pay people according to their work, what their actual value of their labor is worth, which is going to cause all wages to go up. Like, you will see wages immediately spike if we start doing that. And then we eventually, because we don't really do paper money much more anyways, we can transition to a labor voucher economy, where vouchers come into existence and they're liquidated and they disappear upon immediate exchange. So through state capitalism and a brief NEP, we could then proceed to enter socialism once we've built the infrastructure for socialism beforehand. That would be the goal of the brief 5-year state capitalist period. Introduce socialism, overhaul curriculum, nationalize industry, take it over, and we could set up and pave the way for the construction of socialism. All right? Paul Cockshott calculated that equalization wages would raise something like 3/4 of people. Yeah, people would go from making like $10 an hour to 17. People who make like 25 an hour would make like 37, not 37, closer to like, yeah, like closer to like $37, $43 if my math is right. So the entire economy would collapse if it were not for Federal Reserve quantitative easing. Capitalism is dead. It is a zombie, which is absolutely true. Absolutely. Like, the only thing keeping our system alive right now is the fact that we're just endlessly printing money. Like, this system is so unstable and volatile. So yeah, that is like the brief extent to which we are having economic problems, but I'm not finished. There's a little bit more that I want to talk about. But first, yeah, so Cockshott has a lot of good material, both on his channel and written as well. After I get off the stream, I was probably going to do a little reading of Cockshott. But anywho, let's see here. The latest book came by The History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union by Stalin. I need to look that up. In fact, I'm going to look that up right now. All right, let's see what you've got. Wait. Oh, wait. Here we go. I got a PDF of it now. Sweet, 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 sweet. So, last thing. All right. Last thing that I've got to talk about. So, what book? What are you talking about? Towards the New Socialism? I mean, I read half of it. I read up to like chapter 8, chapter 9. Yes, I've read Towards the New Socialism, bro. So, I don't know what you're trying to insinuate. Soc Dems ignore the struggle of the third world. Most countries can't afford welfare states and their profits is shipped to the West. Okay, so let me briefly touch on the dynamic of imperialism, because it is actually technically possible to have social democracy in the third world. You just wouldn't have the productive forces or the resources or the technological advancements in order to make your welfare state good. The only times that capitalist countries have rocketed off and become full-fledged first world countries are when they've practiced protectionist policies, as well as having a strong prevalent trade union movement, as well as having a good environment for the facilitation of scientific innovation. So I'm going through Farm to Factory, and this is a point that I tried to make to Ubersoy, and it's a point that I stand by, but if the Russian Empire remained a capitalist country, if they stayed the capitalist road, they would not have achieved the same level of development as they did as the USSR. Because their initial growth during the early 19th century was driven by a combination of increased agricultural productivity, high agricultural yields, and rising wheat prices on the global market. So were it not for skyrocketing wheat prices, as well as, high agricultural yields, high productivity, because they were an agrarian peasant society that was 75% peasants. If it was not for these factors, their economy would not have grown, because the majority of their economic output was driven by that. Not only that, but we actually saw multiple crashes in the global wheat stocks during not only the late 19 teens, but also during the 1930s. We saw repeated declines and busts. So even assuming under best case scenario, if they maintained the levels of growth that they saw during the turn of the 20th century and sustained that growth, their Russian GDP under a best case scenario, best 100% best case scenario, would have been about $5,300 had it maintained capitalism and monarchy. However, by 1989, they had a GDP of $7,070. So even under the best case scenario, capitalism fails to provide the same levels of wealth that is created by socialism. But under a realistic scenario, we would not have seen that kind of growth and development. Realistically, the Russian Empire would have remained a third world country as living standards were stagnating and real wages for urban workers were stagnating as well. And the push for industrialization and modernization was not being made. And the state under the czars, due to its incompetence, due to the autocratic components of it, and like the fundamental problems with the monarchical state, would have not been able to caught up with the rest of the developed world. Guys, look at monarchies in the third world today. They're all broke as shit. They're all third world. They're all poor. Monarchies are terrible for wealth creation compared to a democratic system. Capitalism only grows and develops wealth if there's a good basis for it. Like, the reason why the first world grew quickly is because, imperialism's part of it, but more importantly, they had a century head start to industrialize, and they were in a very economically favorable and advantageous position on the global market where they could practice protectionist trade policies and increase personal wealth at home. That's the reason why they performed so well. But if you look at the periphery capitalist countries like Latin America, India, Southeast Asia, if you look at these other regions of the world that came from similar starting points, none of them had industrial booms like the Soviets did, because capitalism really only thrives under very specific material conditions. Otherwise, you're not going to see a boom inherently just because you have a capitalist economy. Let's see what we got. USSR should have merged with China. I am a North Korea propaganda bot. So now you know. So yeah, when Ubersoy says that they would have grown faster as the monarchy, he's on the absolute fucking wrong side of this discussion. I've talked to him about this, both in public and in private, and it really is just feels over reals with this guy. It really is just feels over reals. Like, he's too emotionally committed to his position. And he even admits this in the Victor Mogherino debate, and then he accuses me of being emotionally driven. Like, what the fuck is that shit? The USSR had better material conditions than every Latin American country at that time. Which time are you referring to? Because when you look at are you talking about, like, early Russian Empire because they were both agrarian peasant backwaters. Like both Latin America and the USSR had largely agrarian populations. Like, anyways, look at Swaziland, the only monarchist nation in Africa, and it's literally over glorified diamond colony. Exactly. Like, and you'll see, like, if you look at modern day Cambodia, which is also a monarchy, if you look at any of these African countries, the only monarchies that are wealthy, like the first world countries, the only monarchies that are wealthy are not true monarchies. They're constitutional republics. They have parliamentary systems and representative democracies. So yeah, no, monarchy is inferior for wealth creation. Like, there's no other way to put it. When you have an fucking autocratic system where it's the monarchy and like his personal regime that are the ones making all of the decisions, and they're making those decisions based on like royal bloodlines and like nationalist spooks and so on, you're not going to be able to get as much out of it as if even under a capitalist system, like a liberal capitalist system that has a bourgeois democratic system. Bourgeois democracy is objectively superior to a monarchical system. All right. And proletarian democracy is objectively superior to bourgeois democracy. What, you mean Saudi Arabia that's like basically propped up by the United States? We buy their oil and we sell them guns and shit. I've already debated Ubersoy. Like, you can check out the debate on freaking his channel, President Sunday. Monarchies in the Middle East are nothing more than exactly. They're propped up by the West. Like, you know what I mean? Most monarchies are not. I don't know how much I have to repeat myself, but monarchies are terrible systems for wealth creation. We've had monarchies for thousands of years, and living standards countries didn't even start to take off. We didn't start to see scientific innovation or living standards improve until we started deviating away from the model of monarchy. The Gulf monarchies are literally only rich because of slave labor, oil, and what? Yeah, exactly. They're like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel. Israel's not a monarchy, but these countries are largely propped up by the West. Would I debate Carl Ghosn of Swindon? Yes. Yes, I would. I would love to debate Carl Ghosn of Swindon. How would I go about debating Sargon of Akkad exactly? Okay, so how would socialism tackle climate change? Well, for one, at least in the first world, we would need to get away from the growth ethic altogether, because people are pushed to consume for the sake of consuming. And there are so many ways that GDP is artificially inflated that don't correlate to people's living standards at all. Like, for example, let's talk planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence, where goods are deliberately made faulty on purpose with the intent of having them break so that they either need to be serviced or replaced with a new model. There's a great document I'm gonna show you guys. Actually, I'm just gonna go to my video on the subject, and I'm gonna go directly to the quote. Give me one moment, guys. Let's see. Sorry about this, guys. I want to show you guys something. Best goods for the lowest prices. Not that one. It's one of my old green screen videos. No. Where the fuck is my... There you are. Here we go. So I'm just going to play the video of this. Furniture and clothing and other commodities should have the span of life as humans have. When used for their allotted time, they should be retired and replaced by fresh merchandise. It should be the duty of the state as regular business to see the system function smoothly, deciding matters for capital and labor. Then right here, if we can afford to sink ships that cost millions of dollars. So basically, it's an economist. I forget the name of this economist, but he was suggesting how we can end the crisis through planned obsolescence. This article talks all about it in the 1930s. Here we go. Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence by Bernard London. He talks all about it in this article, and this is how we artificially prop up our GDP. So right here. So this article right here, I just left it. I posted it right here, and you guys can read that to your own discretion. But back to the question at hand now. So back to this, because I actually want to talk about this for a bit. So the way that what you would need to do under a socialist planned economy, and I'm speaking within the context of the first world, throw what we know about growth out the window for starters. Throw the whole growth ethic out the fucking window. That would be the first thing. All right. The goal should now be, by government mandate, to make goods that last as long as possible, that are easy to service, that have construction manuals so people can do it on their own, and have recycling protocols built into it so that the base components can be regenerated. That's the ethic we need to start doing. We need to, because everything we make is not built to last. Like, I could point to a number of things in automobiles alone. Like, your average automobile, the modern automobile really is an inferior machine. Like, we could have magnetic electric braking. We could have air filters that could be cleaned out. We could have light bulbs that last decades. We could have potassium ion, lithium ion batteries. Like, there's no reason why having an electric railway system and an electric car system couldn't be put in full global use. So get away from the growth ethic and then introduce 5-year plans. During this time, we would be calculating how much carbon output that we're outputting, and we would need to prioritize the development of technology to drive ourselves to a carbon neutral footprint. And at the same time, build desalinization plants across the shore of every corner, like all of America's shores. Desalinization plants so that we can purify ocean water. At the same time, solar, wind, tidal, and geothermal wherever applicable, and you just build these different green energy systems across the country. You know, I don't think we should do purely solar or purely one of these. Instead, we just have farms of these types of renewable energy, and we just scatter them across the country where it's applicable. I do think I am in favor of green energy, like nuclear energy. I do think that nuclear energy should be heavily utilized and introduced, more preferably thorium reactors, because thorium reactors put off less pollution. The meltdown's not as severe. And I believe we have more thorium than we do the uranium isotope that we use for modern fission. But the point is that we should center our economic planning around not only technology that we have now, but technology that we can reasonably predict that we'll get breakthroughs for in the future. Now, this is going to sound really weird, but we need to plan for innovation. We need to directly plan that we're going to have XYZ breakthroughs and take that into account for long plans. So you would have short milestone 5-year plans, and you would also have long-term 20-year plans, 30-year plans that like broadly overarch the 5-year plans and have various capstones and milestones associated with them. You know, so in 30 years, it's our goal to discover this teleportation technology, and the infrastructure we're building now is meant to accommodate and take that into account. You see what I'm saying? That would be because I'm heavily inspired by Peter Joseph. Zeitgeist movement was a huge influence on me. That's basically what set me on the path to communism. I thought they had great ideas, but on the other hand, I thought their theory was trash. Like, they had no good theory or praxis, basically. But the ideas were good, and that's why I was drawn into it. So, continuing with my explanation. The goal would be, on one hand, to meet everyone's needs and provide the best living standards possible, while at the same time minimizing and conserving the resources that we have. So that would be the goal of the first world, all right? For the second and third world, we would introduce this technology and we would export tech and industrial equipment to the third world as well, and we would help them achieve growth as well, green growth. Now, this growth might not be as quickly. It might not occur as quickly, and it might not be as sustained. It might not occur as quickly. You might not be able to grow these economies as quickly, but it's going to need to be stable, steady, green growth for these countries, all right, up to a reasonable amount, and you uplift them and you help develop their economies, because when they get developed, you're going to be able to plug them in and integrate their systems into like the new larger North American socialist union. And when you have them integrated, you're able to eventually do away with borders. You can get more mines plugged in. You can eventually do away with wars, because when you develop these parts of the world, it'll come back to help you, because then in those developed worlds, they'll be able to have advanced productive forces to help us out. We'll be able to engage in mutual beneficial trade. We'll be able to track and know how much resources we have XYZ globally, So this is kind of like my vision for what I want out of socialism. And all along the way, you could introduce 5-year plans, give people full employment. You could gradually shorten the work week. You could raise living standards. You could introduce a bunch of technology that would solve tons of problems, but it just goes underutilized because the profit motive is in the way. Seriously, guys, the ultimate core takeaway message is this, because I think I'm going to end this stream in about 5 minutes. I had other stuff I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to talk about the water shortage. That's based if true. But I wanted to talk briefly about how we deal with reactionary powers. The same way the Soviets dealt with them, and it's basically going to be Cold War. The goal would be to encircle and subvert their systems and try and put pressure internally for them to have socialist revolutions of their own, basically financing socialist parties, socialist orgs, and helping their workers, in their own struggle against the capitalist system, and, granting them arms and support and so on. The goal would be to aid these revolutionaries in these countries, make their struggles and revolutions successful from within. At the same time, utilize a combination of embargo and encirclement and subversion. The goal would basically be to do what America has been doing to third world countries for decades. Instead of using that to impose capitalism on the world, we would be using it to impose socialism on the world. That's how we would deal with the reactionary powers. He's been critical of the GDP as a whole. Then I don't know what his alternative economic measure entails, but for me, I'm a big fan of the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or the Human Development Index. So human development does take into account income, but it also takes into account years in school, life expectancy at birth, average life expectancy, access to healthcare services, access to, education, nutrition. It takes into account a bunch of these other real material indicators as the quality of life. And I think that the HDI are things that take into account these real material measures. Now, I feel like a broken record by bringing this up, but socialism, capitalism. Let me see if I can find the PDF of this, because, here's the PDF. So let me show you guys this. So these are the indicators that I care the most about, all right? So I've shared this study with you guys, but these are the indicators we should primarily care about right here. So I'll just read the abstract. PQL. I'm concerned with these PQL variables: indicators of health, health services, nutrition, infant mortality, child death rate, life expectancy, population per physician, population per nursing, daily calorie consumption, years in school, literacy rates, higher education enrollment rates, life expectancy, and, GDP. Of course, average spending matters, like light industry, consumer goods, and so on. These are the indicators that I think are most important. And like I said, America's GDP is propped up by debt. Socialist North America, maglev trains from Ohio to Jason's house in Niagara. Yeah, we could do shit like that. If I wanted to, I could hop on a mag-lane bullet train going 500 miles an hour from Ohio. I could, enjoy my evening at the beach on the West Coast, and I could be back in time to go to bed, Or I could have a business meeting in China, and I could take a maglev that runs all the way through Canada, all the way through Russia, and goes down into China. And, I could be in China in like 5 to 6 hours. That's the power of technology I'm talking about. I'm talking about a network of bullet trains. Now, it wouldn't be about the money. It would be about the labor and the resources that we have. Do we have the labor time? Do we have the resources? What are we going to have shortages of? I mean, are we able to make alloys or substitutes? Rational, smooth planning. If North America splits between socialist and reactionary states, well, then it's Civil War time. I don't really know what to say besides that. Who is Joseph Schumpeter and his book Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy? Who is this guy? Joseph Schumpeter, Austrian economist. Is this one of the ECP dudes? Let me see. Career, influence, Keynesianism, demise, economic theory, cycles, and long wave theory. He was an Austrian political economist. All right. You would have to send me, what? Can someone recommend me some books by him? What's the most capitalism, socialism, and democracy? I'm sure I can dig up a PDF of this. Oh, I found a PDF of this. Here we go, 460 pages. I'll go ahead and get cracking on it as soon as I'm done with Farm to Factory, Tova. How to deal with it? You explain what the preconditions are for corruption and how we can deal with it in a future socialist state. So the whole concern with politics is that there will be a disconnect between politicians, the interests of politicians and bureaucrats, and the interests of the workers. Fundamentally, there would be a contradiction or conflict of interests there. So the goal is to have a political apparatus where the politicians and the workers have the same class interest or same inherent interest. So there would be no seed for corruption in the first place. And the way that you could do this is term limits is the first one. And second, I'm in favor. I think certain positions in government should be elected, but for the most part, it should be based on lot by lot sortition democracy. Well, I've said this in previous streams. You have pools of qualified individual candidates sortition directly from the workers below. You train as many people as possible to fulfill leadership positions. And every 5 years, you have someone chosen at random. They serve a term. Then, you can have an election for a second term if they had a satisfactory performance. And then, every 5 to 10 years, you have a new person so that everyone has equal chance. This will remove the preconditions for corruption because you can't bribe your way to the office. Your chances of getting there are as equal as everybody else, High-speed trains they will happen in America, but only under the kind of economic system I'm talking about, So one thing I kind of want to do is just preach about this, do truth, talk about how we would benefit from socialism. I'm probably in the future just going to make a stream of videos talking about specifically socialist ideas, And with that being said, I think I'm going to close this because I need to go to the gym. I'm going to get a solid 20 to 30 minutes of cardio in, come back home, rinse off, and then go to work. No more exponential pay increase in careerism in politics. Make the liberal labor aristocrats cry. Yeah, so that's another thing. Being a bureaucrat or a politician would be just another career. It wouldn't be something that necessarily pays more. The only time that there should be pay differentials introduced is if two things are taken into account: effort and demand. If there's high demand for a specific position or a specific job, then you can introduce a differential. And at the same time, if someone is exceptionally productive, you can go on kind of a pseudo piece rate. I'm in favor of a kind of pseudo piece rate system where you have a flat wage that people are paid, and then you give them a bonus according to productivity. That's kind of what I want. But anyways. In the future, could you react to the Cold War retrospective by cynical historian? Actually, I can react to that. Not right now, but the next time I do Chaos Under Heaven. In the future, could you react to Cold War retrospective? Okay. Cold War retrospective by, what's his name? Cynical historian. All right, cool. What caused the Cold War? Cold War and Red Scare. Could you post a link to it? Actually, you'll have to send me a link or post it in Discord. Do I? Yeah, I have a link to my Discord. So just hit me up in the Discord or just send it to me here. Before you go, is it possible we can have a discussion on stream? I found your ideas intriguing. I've always find it valid in discussion and open debate. Okay, well, here's an idea. I will give you 5 to 10 minutes. All right. Does that sound good? I'll give you like 5 to 10 minutes. Here you go. I will go ahead and do you a solid. And I'm going to post this right here. So if you follow that link, you can come in here and we can briefly talk for 5 minutes live. But hurry up. The clock's ticking. I'm going at like, we'll call it 1:21, hour and 21 minutes. Oversimplified Cold War videos. Okay. Oversimplified Cold War. Okay. Gotcha. I will keep this in mind. I will save this to my watch later. Here we go.
Hello there.
Hello. Hello. What's up?
That's good. Yeah. First time ever been on stream. So I've been an avid watcher of you and like other leftists. I've always been like considering other perspectives on the leftists. I've been intrigued by Marxist-Leninist ideology, but personally, I've always had some skepticism about it.
All right. I can address a little bit of it before I go, but I can't really debate you because it's the end of the stream.
Oh, no, I don't want to debate you. I just want to ask you a simple question.
Sure. Ask away. I'm listening.
How would you ensure that a centrally planned economy wouldn't just succumb to corruption and stagnation and lead, to... you probably addressed this already on the stream, but how would you ensure it just fall apart, like in the Soviet Union?
Oh, well, part of what I was saying earlier was through a revamped political process. Like I said, part of preventing corruption is making sure that people in positions of leadership have the same interests as the people below, or they have a similar enough interests to where what they do with their actions from above aren't going to be contradictory or cynical. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that people in leadership positions are from below. Does that make sense? Like, as in,
yeah, I think it makes sense. It sounds something similar to what I have in mind.
Yeah. Stagnation, there wouldn't be... The whole thing about stagnation in the USSR is exaggerated, but that's a different conversation. There wouldn't really be stagnation in my system. What I'm referring to is a steady state economy. So economic growth as we know it wouldn't be a thing anymore for the sake of maintaining a balanced load with our habitat. And we should focus on the general quality of life over just how much money people are spending,
Okie dokie. Personally, I am much more in favor of participatory democratic economics. So I'm in favor of like central planning, but decentralized.
Yeah. I'm in favor of kind of a hybrid system. I want both central and decentral planning. Like, there's elements of decentral at like a local and regional level, but you still have a strong central government,
Yeah. Like, personally, I always have it like in a 5-step plan, where like you include like market socialism as a good transitionary period, because you can't because central plan economy can't always manage stuff on the more small local level.
The light industry end. Honestly, I think nowadays the light industry problem isn't really an issue. I do think market socialism, I mean, it would really just be state capitalism though, because
Oh yeah, it definitely would be.
It would basically be state capitalism. The state capitalist / market socialist period would would be kind of unavoidable because you have to enter a transition period before setting up the infrastructure for actual socialism. So I don't really disagree with that.
Yeah. So yeah, you're not. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm no longer an anarchist, because I find it kind of silly that you can just overthrow the state and then suddenly they expect, oh yeah, everything is just gonna be casteless, stateless society. So great.
Yeah, the issue is anarchists don't they reject or they don't understand the class nature of the state. That is to say, the state has a class interest, and I think you need to sustain that. Really, what happened in like former socialist projects is there was a disconnect between the bureaucracy and regular workers, like, and it started to get bad, like really bad under Brezhnev, like during the 70s into the 80s. Like we didn't like Gorbachev didn't come out of thin air, you know. Hello?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mic is acting weird. So I've just been but I always find it interesting. Even though I don't agree with anarchists on many things, I think we as like leftists should still take in anarchist critiques and takes on the state, because even people like Mao have a significant anarchist influence to them, especially with his idea of like, the masses overthrowing and committing regular purges against the party whenever they decide to deviate from the line.
Yeah, I have my criticisms and concerns about the mass line, but I'll save that for another discussion. Why don't you join my Discord, bro?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, I always link it in the description. In fact, I'm gonna link it.
I'll check it in the description.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and post it here, right here. So yeah, you guys can join my Discord. It expires never. Generate new link. So this should do you well.
Thank you so much for letting me on briefly.
Yeah, no problem.
I hope we can talk again sometime in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Some good exchange of ideas.
Oh yeah. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna end the broadcast now. So everyone, see you later.
Off, comrade.